The floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank you for organizing today's event. We're grateful to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his briefing, and also we thank Ambassador Mulamula, Ms. Maite and Ms. Velakazi for their interesting briefings. We comprehensively support the subject that our South African friends have placed at the center of today's discussion, because indeed the task of preventing armed conflict was placed before the UN and its Security Council back when the organization was founded. Why this task is not being done as it should be is a big question, and perhaps it's a question of political will, or rather the lack of political will. And yet the prevention of armed conflicts, in particular on the African continent, is vitally important in processes of ensuring global stability. Today, now more than ever, preventive diplomacy and its main mechanisms, mediation and good offices, are needed. And indeed, as Ms. Mulamula said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The UN has everything that it needs to serve as a basis to work in this area. Chapters 1 and 6 of the UN Charter, and also a number of other decisions, as well as Security Council Resolution 2171, which enshrine the fundamental principles of international assistance in this area. We welcome the efforts of the Secretary General to strengthen this capacity. An important element of it was the establishment in 2017 of the High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation, made up of authoritative politicians and diplomats. We fully agree with the idea contained in the concept note that the voice of Africa has to be taken into account on issues of peace and security on the continent. And moreover, we are convinced that this voice needs to be a decisive one. It's important for African countries themselves, in accordance with the principle of national ownership, to play an important role in the prevention and resolution of conflicts. The job of the international community is to support these efforts whilst observing state sovereignty in strict compliance with the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. Mr. President, we are pleased to note that in recent years, the arsenal of African countries has acquired a whole host of mechanisms and tools for conflict prevention on the continent. They are all included in the African Peace and Security Architecture, the main elements of which are the Panel of the Wise, the Continental Early Warning System, and the African Peace Facility. In executing its mandate to prevent conflicts, the Continental Organization is adhering to the Plan of Action to build the AU's mediation capacity and the standard operating procedures for mediation support. Important obligations in preventive diplomacy are enshrined in the AU-UN Joint Partnership Framework for Enhanced Partnership in Peace and Security, which was signed in 2017. There are also practical results in this area. In particular, the African Union has made a sizable contribution to achieving comprehensive peace agreements in the CAR and in South Sudan, in holding peaceful and democratic elections in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Nigeria, and improving the situation in the Horn of Africa. Recent examples include the successful work of the Special Envoy of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Lebat, in stabilizing the situation in Sudan. A substantial role is played by African sub-regional organizations as well, including ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC, and the Economic Community of Central African States. We must also note in this respect the recent success story of the African Union, the UN, SADC, and other partners working together to prevent political crisis in Madagascar. We comprehensively support the strengthening of partnership on these issues between the UN Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council. In this context, the Security Council Ad Hoc Working Group on Conflict Prevention and Resolution in Africa has a lot of potential. We believe that this cooperation must be carried out based on mutual respect and along the lines of regional initiatives. The basis of preventive diplomacy must be an impartial and balanced approach, and only mediation, which works to bring positions close together, find common ground, and achieve mutually acceptable agreements, has any chance of success. It is necessary to support and maintain dialogue with all constructive players that are involved in a conflict. It is also important to remember the fine line that lies between preventive diplomacy and pressure on internal political processes. Often the only thing that's needed to prevent a conflict is to end interference in internal affairs and refrain from mentoring about how to build democracy and observe human rights. An example of an altogether hapless case of prevention was the NATO operation in Libya, conducted in violation of a Security Council mandate and which led to the emergence of a great many problems in Libya and itself and in the Sahara-Sahel region, and also to the spread of terrorism there. We do not need this sort of prevention. Mr. President, Russia will continue to provide consistent political support to the efforts of the African community to prevent and resolve African conflicts. We stand ready to continue to support Africa in strengthening its own anti-crisis potential, including through the training of peacekeepers and law enforcement officers from African states in Russian training institutions. We trust that the upcoming first ever Russia-Africa summit will serve as a catalyzer for our cooperation with African countries and give an impetus to the normalization of the situation on the continent. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement.